All right, hi everybody. Professor Jeff here, back again. We're in Language Power by Professor Dana Ferris. Today, we're going to talk about tutorial 24. This is verb phrases. So we have talked a lot about verbs in this class already, very likely. But because verbs are sort of the big boss of all English sentences, right? The verb is, arguably the most important part of a sentence in terms of deciding or determining what the grammar around the verb is. So that's why we talk about verbs so much, not just tense, but phrases and passive and active voice constructions and modals, and there's a lot of stuff going on with verbs. So as always, follow along with me on the screen, follow along with me in your textbook, whatever is best for you. But our introduction begins here on page 385. So, verb phrases. Because verbs are important and often complex elements in English sentences, a number of tutorials in this collection address them. Tutorials 1, 2, and 3 give basic info. Tutorial 11 offers advice about the passive voice. Tutorials 19 and 20 cover verb tense and subject-verb agreement. Like I said, verbs are important. Now, this tutorial addresses problems that writers may have with forming verb phrases in different sentence constructions. So, like always, context, 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 right? We've looked at all these different, ways to form different verb constructions. So when do we use each of these different constructions? Of course, contexts is the answer, and that's what this tutorial is about. So we'll also examine the complex and important topic of auxiliaries within verbs. So that's auxiliaries and modals as well. So questions to ask yourself before we dive in. 1, what's the basic structure of English verb phrases? 2, how can I recognize verb form errors? And 3, what is the role of auxiliary words in verb phrases? Exciting. So our discover activity on 386. The instructions say, examine the following text excerpt. First, underline all the verbs. Then, be sure to notice any endings attached to the specific verb, for example, ed or ing. Then place brackets around the entire verb phrase. When you've finished, complete the chart that follows the text. The first one's done for you as an example. So, I would like to describe myself as a good reader, but not an effective writer. So, the entire verb phrase is would like. So, there's the subject I. Would and like go together. They're in brackets. That's the phrase. And like is the main verb. It has been underlined. So, here the verb phrase says would like. The verb ending, none. There are other elements here, right? We do have a modal auxiliary. We have would. And notes on the meaning, as Professor Ferris says here, this expresses a present future meaning and a bit of hesitation. I would like to describe myself instead of I would describe myself. And that's a little bit of an advanced construction, but at the very least, I'd really like you to go through this activity and identify the verb phrase, identify the verb ending, and any other elements. So we can do one more together here. So, whether it is the front page of a sports website or a great work of literature, I've come to see reading as a way to relax where I can escape the real world. So, whether it is the front page, so here we have it is the subject, is the verb, verb endings, none, right? So, not all of them will be difficult and complex, right? Some are just going to be basic and easy. So do your best, see if you can find the correct answers, and be ready to talk about this or look at the answers in a Zoom or an office hours meeting. Here we go. So here we go on tutorial 24, page 388, recognizing verb form errors. Now, other tutorials in this collection discuss verbs and verb phrases in some detail. Here are a few summary points, and for each point, check out the tutorial in parentheses for more info. So first, verb phrases can consist of a verb alone or a verb and other words. That's tutorial 3. Next, the main verb within a phrase may be marked or changed for tense, meaning past or present time, and aspect, meaning progressive or completed action. The change may appear as a word ending or an alternate form, as is the case where go becomes went, and this was for tutorial 19. A verb phrase may also include auxiliary verbs that help form the tense and aspect of the main verb, also from tutorial 19. Some verb phrases include modal auxiliaries that come before the main verb and express the verb's necessity or possibility. Those are modals, and that's also tutorial 19. And action verbs may also be expressed in active or passive voice. That's tutorial 11. So as a quick review and point of reference, the following chart provides examples for all of the preceding bulleted statements. So verb alone or verb plus other words: Mary went home alone, Mary didn't go, Mary isn't happy, Mary was hiding under the porch. All of those examples: went home alone, didn't go, isn't happy, was hiding under the porch. Those are the verb phrases, right? So a verb phrase can be one word or more than one word. We've talked about this when we talked about noun phrases for subject noun phrases, right? One word can be a phrase by itself. Next, examples of verbs marked for tense or aspect. So George walks 3 miles a day, marked with the third person singular S. Walked home from the bus stop, marked with ed for the simple past tense. Is walking the dog. The main verb is marked with ing to show that it's continuous. In this case, be, the be auxiliary helping verb, is in the present tense, so this is present continuous. And George has walked to work every day. Here we get our auxiliary have in the present tense as has for third person singular. Walked, so this verb is marked for as with an ed for the past participle. Has walked is the present perfect tense. Verb phrases can also have auxiliary verbs. So Buster is chasing his tail. Is the auxiliary to create the present continuous. Buster has finished. Has is the auxiliary verb for the present perfect. Verb phrases with modal auxiliaries. The girls might join us later. The girls shouldn't wear so much makeup. Might and should are our modals in these verb phrases. And finally, verb phrases in the active and the passive voice. Our cat climbed the tree. The tree was climbed by the cat. Here, climbed alone is the verb phrase, and in the second passive voice we get was climbed as the verb phrase. You can look at the sidebar box like usual if you like, but we'll continue on to page 389. Now, I'm sorry, page 390, excuse me, we're here on 390. So, avoiding verb form errors in writing. So these are all of the different things that you have to think about when you're using verbs in your writing. Now notice that this isn't even about the verb tense, right? She's not even talking about the tense in this example. Professor Ferris is just talking about all of the different elements that might show up in a verb phrase, right? So how do you avoid errors when you're writing? So writers typically form verb phrases incorrectly in the following 4 ways, listed from most to least common. First, by omitting a necessary verb ending. Next, by adding an unnecessary verb ending. Then by using an incorrect verb form. And finally, by omitting a necessary auxiliary in a verb phrase. So the next sections will help you avoid such errors in your own writing. So you must include necessary verb endings. Now, as noted in the review chart on pages 388 and 389, verbs in many phrases can be marked for tense, past or present time, or aspect, in progress or completed action. Marked means that a particular verb ending is used to form that verb phrase correctly in the context of the sentence. Now, here are several examples of incorrectly formed verb phrases. He always drives to school on Tuesdays. Should be drives. Last year I traveled to Italy with my family. Traveled. He's come over by 2 o'clock to watch the game with us. Coming. Here we're using the present continuous to talk about the future. I've finished my paper, so I'm going to bed now. I've finished. We need the past participle with the ed. And the ice cream is all eat. Should be eaten. Again, this is passive voice. So we have the auxiliary verb be here, and we need the past participle of eat for eaten. Now, in each of these sentences, there are clues about what the verb form should be. For example, in the first sentence, the word he always conveys that the statement is generally true, meaning that the verb should be in the third person singular present tense form, and an S should have been added to the verb drive. Similarly, last year, in the second example, signals that the travel occurred in the past, so the verb travel should have an ed ending to indicate past tense. Writers may get confused and omit verb endings for the following reasons. So Why do we make mistakes when we make them? First, on page 391, the information conveyed by the verb ending seems unnecessary because it repeats information provided elsewhere in the sentence, such as last year in the second example on 390. And for speakers of different languages around the world, this could be a particular challenge because in many languages, you don't have to mark the verb for past tense if you have a time word in the sentence like yesterday, right? In many languages, you could say yesterday walk to store, right? You don't need to add the tense on the verb. You get tense from other words in the sentence. So if you speak one of those languages as your first or second or one of your first languages, this can be challenging. This can be challenging. But in English, even if you have time words to indicate the past, you've got to mark the verb for tense. Always. Always. Now, also, sometimes there's information about verb tense and aspect that's added differently in various languages. For example, in some languages, a particle is added to a sentence that indicates past time, but no change is made to the verb itself. Multilingual writers must adapt their strategies when using verbs. This is what I just said. In English, verb tense and aspect come in a wide range of combinations, right? These are some of our favorite tenses. The present perfect progressive, right? Have been thinking. The passive voice, was thought, right? Subjunctive mood. Irregular verbs. It's not surprising that a writer might not master everything or might make a mistake when they're in a hurry. Now, if you sometimes feel confused for any of these reasons, or you leave out necessary verb endings, pay special attention to editing your verb phrases when you write. Asking yourself the following questions can help make sure you've added the required endings to your verbs. 1. Is this verb in the simple past or simple present tense? 2. If the verb is in the simple present tense, is it the subject third person singular? This means that the subject's either he, she, or it, or that the subject's a noun phrase that could be replaced by he, she, or it. If so, you need to add s or es to the verb. He watches TV every night, for example. 3. If the verb is in the simple past, what is the past tense verb form? Is it regular or irregular? If the verb is regular, add an ed. Unless the verb already ends with e, then you can just add the d, like changing breathe to breathed. Now, is the action indicated by the verb still in progress? If so, add an ing to the verb form. This may also require spelling adjustments, such as doubling a consonant, like when swim becomes swimming, or dropping an e, as in the case of ride becoming riding. 5. Has the action indicated by the verb form been completed, requiring the past or present perfect tense? For example, I have finished my homework. If so, what is the past participle form of the verb? If it is a regular past participle, like in finished, you just need to add an ed. Again, there might be some spelling adjustments necessary as well. So again, one thing Professor Ferris does really well is talk about really important information in a short amount of time, which I love. It means we don't have to do 30 pages of grammar reading. But these 2 pages, 390, 391, they are dense. Okay, again, pause, rewind, read in your book on your own time. These are really important ideas and really helpful questions that you can ask yourself. So I just encourage you, you could spend weeks reviewing the information on page 390 and 391, because basically Professor Ferris is explaining how English verb phrases work across the whole language. And again, that's a different way of learning and studying grammar than just, studying one verb tense at a time. But it's so, so helpful. So especially these 5 questions at the bottom of page 391, really look at them again, give them some time. They're really, really helpful. Really, really helpful. So moving on. If you've paused, if you've looked, if you've reviewed, you feel good about those pages, you can look at practice number 1. The instructions say, examine the following sentences based on the verb endings and other information in the sentence. Identify the verb tense and aspect, if applicable, and complete the chart. These are the options: simple present, simple past, past progressive, past perfect, present perfect. The first one's done for you. A lot of money was riding on the outcome of the football game. Past progressive. Was writing. Now, the professor always looks tired on Mondays. The verb is looks. What do we got? Tense and aspect. I had never cooked. Melissa is coming. Baby rolled out. And I have usually adjusted. What do we got? Take your time, do your thing. Bring questions to student office hours. All right, 393, avoiding unnecessary verb endings. Now, the preceding section, the section that came before this, was all about creating verb phrase errors by omitting necessary verb endings. Sometimes writers will make the opposite mistake. They have learned the rules about adding verb endings, but haven't yet learned the exceptions to those rules. Now, in the following cases, the main verb should not take an ending. So, when there is a form of the auxiliary do in the phrase, so he did not walk to the store. Next, when the verb is in the infinitive form, where you get to plus the base. So she likes to watch a lot of reality TV. Next, when there is a modal auxiliary in the phrase, can, may, should, so on, the professor can see you texting during class. And finally, when the phrase used to precedes the verb, we used to cook dinner together every night. And remember, these examples she's giving us are where she's saying, do not add endings, right? The main, as she says up here, the main verb should not take an ending. So in the first two examples, the highlighted verb is not marked with an ending for past or present tense because that information is already provided elsewhere in the phrase. In this case, it's did, right? The auxiliary verb is marked for tense because did is the past tense form of do. And likes is marked for the third person singular tense. The second two examples illustrate rules where writers simply need to remember. Use the base form of the verb. Do not add an ending if the verb is preceded by a modal auxiliary or by used to. And I'm just going to read that last paragraph again because it is so important and so helpful. So in the first two examples, the highlighted verb is not marked with an ending for the past or present tense because that information is already provided elsewhere in the verb phrase. Did is the past tense form of do. Likes is marked for third person singular present tense. The second two examples illustrate rules where writers simply need to remember you use the base form of the verb. Do not add an ending if the verb is preceded by a modal auxiliary or by used to. That's why I use this book. In one paragraph, Professor Ferris lays it down for us, explains it. It's hard. It's hard to do consistently and to use these rules perfectly, but she just explains it so well. So, practice 2 on 394 helps us practice some of these things. It says, in the following sentences, all of the boldface verbs have endings added. Some are correct, some are incorrect. For the ones you think are incorrect, explain what part of the verb phrase makes those endings unnecessary. The first one is done for you. We want to grilling some steaks this weekend. Incorrect or correct, incorrect, and why? To makes the verb an infinitive, so the ing ending is unnecessary. How about the next one? George always comes over on Sundays to watch football and drink our beer. Correct or incorrect? Correct. This is absolutely grammatically correct, but I'll let you on your own explain why, right? Why is this correct? Why is this correct? All right. 395. So use the correct form of the verb. Now, even if you correctly understand verb endings and when to use them or not use them, there are a lot of irregularities and exceptions in English verb forms. Not all past tense verbs, for example, are formed by adding ed. To use individual English verbs correctly, there are 3 general things you need to consider. First, the difference between linking or stative verbs and action verbs. Next, the verb's conjugation, especially for linking verbs. And finally, the verb's 3 parts, or participle forms, especially for action verbs. Now, linking verbs are so named because they link the subject-noun phrase to a description of that subject. They're sometimes called stative verbs because they express the state of the subject. Here's some examples. Joe is a teacher. Katie seems tired. Mom has a headache. You can see that in these examples, the verb does not express any particular action. Instead, it links the subject to some descriptive information, right? Joe is a teacher, Katie tired, mom headache. The most commonly used linking verbs in English are be, become, have, seem, appear, feel, grow, look, prove, remain, smell, sound, taste, and turn. Now, when a verb is used in this way, it can be marked for the present or past tense. Katie seems tired. Mom had a headache. But it cannot be put into the progressive form by adding ing. Katie is seeming tired, or Mom was having a headache would both be incorrect. However, some of these linking verbs can also serve as action verbs in a different sentence. Mom is having a dinner party. In this example, have is used as an action verb similar to mom is hosting a dinner party, or giving, I would add, a dinner party. So it can be made progressive by adding is to the sentence and by adding ing to change have to having. Now, whether a verb is linking or action, you also need to know its conjugation, meaning specifically what its form is when it is used with different subject pronouns or noun phrases. Now, while most verb conjugations in English are pretty similar, there are some major exceptions, as the following chart shows. So first person singular, I walk, typical verb, right? But I am for the be verb, and I have for have. Second person singular or plural, the pronoun is you, and again the typical verb is walk, so you walk, but for be it's you are, and for have it's you have. Third person singular, he, she, it, so again typical verb is going to be walks, or he, she, it is for the be verb, he, she, it has for the have verb. First person singular, that's we, the typical verb is walk, but for the be verb it's we are, and for have it's have. Third person singular, that'd be they, and a typical verb is walk, so they walk, but for be it's they are, and for have it's they have. Again, information you probably already know, but just helpful to see these rules over and over and over again, especially for be and have, because they're so common. Now finally, you need to know a verb's past tense form and its past participle form. So the base form of the verb, that's walk, go, be, and put. The past tense would be walked, went, was or were, and put. And the past participle would be walked, that's a regular one, gone, irregular, been, irregular, put, also irregular. So again, things you've already studied in other grammar classes, usually when you're looking at verb tenses or verbs themselves, this is something you do all the time, right? Walk, walked, walked, right? Go, went, gone. Be, was, been. Give, gave, given, whatever, right? So this table showing the principal parts of just 4 verbs illustrates several things, some basic rules about the verbs. First, regular verbs take predictable endings, ed, for both the past tense and the past participle forms. 2, irregular verbs, such as go or be, have completely unpredictable past and past participle forms that have to be learned and memorized individually. I'm sorry, but it's true. Number 3, some verbs such as put, when conjugated for third person singular in the present tense, he puts, do not change form for the past or past participle, right? Put, put, put. And I'm sure you already know other examples of these that don't change between the base form, the past tense, and the past participle. Now, if verb forms are sometimes a problem for you, you may need to pay attention to learning the verb's conjugation and its past and past participle form. You can check a verb's forms in English Learner's Dictionary or by searching online for irregular verbs or principal parts of verbs. Again, I'll just highlight that. Go to learnersdictionary.com, just Google irregular verbs in English. You can see a full list of these, and I'm sure if you've ever taken any other grammar class, you've seen these lists and charts right there. They're in every book because they're important and they're helpful. So that's verbs, right? And we've started, hopefully, at this point already to practice verb endings and started to notice some of these things. But of course, a verb phrase is not just the verb tense and the verb ending. We also have auxiliaries, including modals. So let's talk about it. So you need to include necessary auxiliaries in your verb phrases. Now, if you're using the present participle, for example, that's the ing form of the verb, To express an action that's in progress, you must use the correct form of the verb be. So, I was going to the store when my car broke down. They are coming over later to watch a movie with us. Next week, I will be driving to a conference in Santa Barbara. If you're using the past participle form of the verb, ed, for regular verbs, or other forms for irregular verbs to express an action that is completed, you must add the correct form of the verb have, right? So she has learned to speak 3 languages fluently. They had eaten dinner before they arrived at our house. Again, so auxiliary have is for the perfect aspect. Auxiliary be is for the continuous aspect, right? So ing and be, past participle for have. Also, if you're using the past participle form of the verb to create a passive voice construction, you must add the appropriate form of the verb to be. So after the leftover chicken was eaten by the hungry teenagers, I am disgusted by the political commercials on TV. See tutorial 11 for more info about the passive voice. Now, if verb phrase errors are sometimes a problem in your writing, check to make sure that you've used the correct form of the main verb and have added an auxiliary if one is required. In some more sidebar you can look at on page 398 if you want more details. But again, if, you know, here's an idiom for you, I'm a broken record. That just means when a person keeps saying the same thing over and over, you could say, oh my God, they're like a broken record. They keep repeating the same thing. If that didn't make sense, stop, pause, rewind, go back, right? Reread. It's dense, but it's important. So go slow, take your time, and rewind the video if you need it. I'm here with you for that. That's why I make these videos. So go back and reread if you don't understand what Professor Ferris was talking about there on page 397. But continuing on to 398. So defining modal auxiliaries. So modal auxiliaries are words that can be inserted into verb phrases to add information about the necessity or possibility of the idea or action in the main verb. They include words such as can, may, might, and should. While modals are not especially complicated grammatically, it is extremely important to understand their meaning and their function. It's also important to understand how the presence of a modal in a verb phrase affects the form of the base verb. So the most basic modals in English are shown in the following chart. So the present form of can in the past becomes could. So he can bench press 300 pounds. Or he could bench press 300 pounds when he was 25. Then we've got may in the present and might in the past. So he may want to come to the party. He might have wanted to come to the party, but now he's made other plans. Shall in the present form, not very common in California English, if I'm honest with you, both speaking and writing, but you might hear it. Should in the past, very common. I shall send you the letter immediately. Or I should have sent you the letter already, but I didn't. And I'll highlight that because much more common. In the present, you hear will, and in the past, you might see would. So I will be there in 5 minutes. Or I would have been there on time, but the traffic was awful. And must in the present form stays must in the past. You must come to our meeting on Tuesday. You must have come by when our office was closed. There are other forms that act like modals but do not share all of these same characteristics, all of these same rules. These include words and phrases like ought to, need, had better, and used to. They function as modals only in certain sentences, like in the following examples. You really ought to come with us. You need not think you're smarter than I am. He'd better get here soon or he will miss the opening act. And we used to eat dinner later before we had kids. Some of these modal and modal-like forms are now considered rather old-fashioned, like shall, ought to, and needn't, and you will encounter them more frequently in older books or movies in English. You may want to use alternatives in your own writing, so should instead of ought to, for example, in the first sentence. I totally agree with Professor Ferris about this. Ought to is just not used very, very often, even in academic writing. So should is much more common in speaking and in writing. So, using modal auxiliaries. Now that we've defined modals, we'll discuss the most important things you need to know about using them in your own writing. So, first, you need to recognize forms of verb phrases that include modal auxiliaries. So, the presence of modal auxiliaries in a verb phrase changes the way in which verbs are marked or not marked for tense and aspect. I'll just repeat that again, right? Why are modals important in English grammar? Well, they're important because the presence of modal auxiliaries in a verb phrase can change the ways in which verbs are marked or not marked for tense and aspect. And we'll see some examples. So, the following 3 tips will help you sort through those rules. So tip number 1, when there's a modal in the verb phrase, do not add the present tense s to the base form or use a past tense form. Again, I could highlight this whole page. So he should drives here instead of taking the bus. No, he should drive. Now because the modal auxiliary should, no s needs to be added. He should drive here instead of taking the bus. So even though it's third person singular, no s because we have the modal in the sentence, in the verb phrase. Next, we couldn't eat at the restaurant because it was closed already. Now, because of the modal auxiliary could, the present tense verb should be used. We couldn't eat at the restaurant because it was closed already. Here, could is already in the past tense. This is already marking past tense in the verb phrase, so we don't need to put the verb itself, the main verb, into the simple past tense. You want to use the base form of that verb and let the modal be marked for verb tense, right? You with me? If not, go back, rewind, reread. This is important. Hard, but important. Tip number 2. When there is a modal auxiliary in the verb phrase, do not add ing to the base form. So we will eating dinner at 7. Because of the modal auxiliary will, the base form should be used. Do not add ing. We will eat dinner at 7 o'clock. Tip number 3, you can, however, use a modal with the present perfect construction, just like there are several example sentences on the charts in page 398 and 399. He might have wanted to come to the party, but now he's made other plans. I would have been here on time, but the traffic was awful. Again, this example in tip 3 is a really important way to think about the difference between the simple past tense and the past participle, right? I can teach you a rule that says, well, Professor Ferris is talking about this rule here where if you have a modal auxiliary, you don't need to put the main verb into the simple past tense, right? But then some students look at this and say, might have wanted. Jeff, what's going on? There's wanted, it's ed, it's the simple past tense. Have wanted means that we have the present perfect tense, means that we have the auxiliary have, we have the past participle form of the verb, and we can use modals and the past participle together, like in the examples in tip 3. So he might have wanted to come to the party. I would have been here on time. Pardon me. It's dense. It's dense. It's dense. But it's so important. Okay, next, understand functions of modal auxiliary. Functions means why. When do we use which modals, right? Now, modals are essential for expressing facts or opinions accurately. Now, look at the differences. So, a statement of fact, no modal. He eats a lot. It's just a fact. And again, you're hearing one of my phones around me going off. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep going. So excuse the sound. Now, you can use modals to talk about opinions, right? He should eat a lot. In my opinion, that is something he should do. I think that is a good idea. The expression of possibility. He might eat a lot. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. He might. The expression of necessity. He must eat a lot. Or I would also add, he has to eat a lot, right? Those are sort of like a phrasal modals, right? Saying he must, no choice, he has to do it. Or a statement of future fact, he will eat a lot. Now these are simple everyday sentences. Let's look at some more academic, more complicated, more complex examples. So a statement of fact, no modal. The state of California outlawed the death penalty. Outlawed means banned, said no, stopped, said you could not do it. Expression of possibility, the state may outlaw the death penalty. Expression of necessity, the state should outlaw the death penalty. Now, in a paper for school, in which you're both explaining facts and expressing opinions, this could be like in persuasive writing, a summary and response type of writing, anything where you're advocating, you're fighting for, you're making the argument for a specific position, it is extremely important to know when to use modals or not, and which modal to use. An opinion stated as a fact without a modal might make your writing seem too strong. However, an opinion stated with the wrong modal might make it seem too weak. Let's look at the following examples. So, number one, scientists always take appropriate precautions when doing experiments. Number two, scientists can take appropriate precautions when doing experiments. Number three, scientists might take appropriate precautions when doing experiments. Number four, scientists should take appropriate precautions when doing experiments. And number five, scientists must take appropriate precautions when doing experiments. All five of these sample sentences, the grammar's perfect, right? But the meaning is slightly different in them. So different modals, different meaning, and you want to make sure you're choosing the best modal for the meaning that you want to convey in that sentence, in that essay, whatever. Right, so as Professor Ferris explains those five sentences, more context on page 402. In example 1 on page 401, there is no modal, so the writer's opinion is stated as a fact about what scientists always do. This statement is too strong, and readers could easily argue against it. Sentences 2 and 3 are true, but probably not strong enough if the writer wants to express an opinion about the scientist's precautions. Sentence 4 is better, but it still makes it sound like appropriate precautions are optional. And finally, sentence 5 makes the opinion about this important point seem strong enough, but not too strong. All right, the apply activity here on page 403, we're almost done with this tutorial. So 1, for this exercise, use a paper you're working on or have recently completed. Go through at least one page and highlight every verb phrase. Check each verb phrase for the error types discussed in this tutorial. So first, are there any missing verb endings? Are there any unnecessary verb endings? Are there any incorrect verb forms? Are there any missing auxiliaries like be or have in verb phrases that are marked as progressive, perfect, or passive? If you find any verb phrases that you think are formed incorrectly, try to make the corrections. If you're unsure of the correct verb form, the past tense or past participle, research the form in a print or online dictionary by searching for verb tenses online. You can submit a list of your corrections or a marked copy of your text with corrections included. Second, ask yourself, how often do you use modal auxiliaries in your writing, and for what purpose? For this exercise, examine at least 2 pieces of writing that you've done for a class, for a job application, or an email, for example. Use 2 different types of writing. Search your paper for any modals you used. Write a brief paragraph that responds to the following questions, referring to specific examples from your own 2 texts. 1, which modals did you use? For what purposes? Did you use them in one text type more than another? Are there any places where you might have used the wrong ones, where you needed to use one but you didn't use one, or where you used one but you shouldn't have? Right? Just more noticing activities about how you use modals in your own writing. So wrapping up here on page 404. So what you've learned that verb phrases have various components, including endings on verbs to mark tense, auxiliaries to mark progressive or perfect actions, or modal auxiliaries to add more information about the verb. You've learned that there are different ways that verb phrases can be incorrectly formed by omitting a necessary verb ending, by including an unnecessary verb ending, or by using the wrong form of the verb or omitting, keeping out a necessary auxiliary. You've learned that there are several specific rules for using verb endings in phrases where there are modal auxiliaries. That's page 398 and 400. I highly recommend those pages again. And you've learned that modal auxiliaries can help a writer express facts and opinions more precisely and appropriately. Yeah, I know that this has been a longer tutorial, so I won't talk too much here at the end. But I just want to say, I think that this is one of the most important tutorials in this whole book. It's not my dream that you understand every single rule here perfectly at the end of this chapter, because this is basically Professor Ferris trying to explain every rule for verb phrases in English in one chapter. But I think it's really helpful and I think it's really beneficial to see these rules because these are almost more important than how to make the present continuous, right? For example, present continuous is be plus base form plus ing. Okay, good. I mean, you have to learn how to make the verb form, but even if you make the verb form correctly, you can still make verb form errors depending on the context of the sentence, if you have a modal, if you have any other elements that are included in the verb phrase. So that's why I think this chapter, this tutorial is so, so important. So go back, go slow, watch this video a few more times, and be ready to analyze your verb phrases because it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. If you're watching this and we haven't done any writing or analysis of your own verb phrases, it's coming. I didn't mean to say that's scary. It's fun, right? It's fun to analyze our own writing because that's how we actually start to improve. Like I've been talking about all semester long, right? Learning how to make a verb tense, right? Have been going. Great. Fine. That's wonderful, right? Have, modal auxiliary have, I'm sorry, just the auxiliary have, been, past participle of the be verb, and going, go plus ing. Okay, all that's great. But how do you use it in a sentence? I mean, that's everything. That's everything. So when you start to analyze your own writing for this type of verb phrase stuff, big growth can happen. Big growth and improvement in our sentences can happen. So you're on the way. You're on the way. Thanks everybody for watching this video. And of course, as always, bring your questions to the Zoom meeting, to student office hours, to email, text, whatever you need. And be ready to talk about those questions when we meet in person. Thanks everybody. I will see you soon.